Now, after Moses came down the mountain, after that whole experience and everything, God, over the 40 years in the desert, Moses started teaching the Jewish people everything that he learned on Mount Sinai. Now, here's a little sneak preview of what he said. He said that for the Jewish people, you have 613 different laws to keep with all their details. And for everybody else out there, there's, I don't know how many million people were in the world then, but let's say today there's 13.5 million Jews and 13 billion people. So for you, for the Jewish people, for you it would be 613 laws, and for everybody else, it's going to be 7.
What are the 7?
We're going to get to that in a second.
Okay, good. Are they from the Noahic covenant, or are they?
That is the Noahic covenant.
Okay.
That is the Noahic covenant. Just a quick background of what this means. Getting back to where we started was that God's plan was that we should be God's gardeners in His garden. That we should make this world a place into a beautiful place, place where God's presence is felt. So the rest of the world are meant to make that setting where that place is meant to be, which in a very, very general way, the world should run according to God's plan. It should be a civil world, etc. It should be a nice, pleasant world to live in. That is the general idea of the 7 Noahide laws. The Jewish people have the job to bring in specific spiritual energy through their 613 laws. So the very general to make this world a civil, beautiful, peaceful place. That's the mission of all of mankind. The mission of the Jewish people specifically is to take that beautiful setting that all of mankind made and add a beautiful spiritual aspect to it. So that's that everybody's meant to work hand in hand. This is also why, just on a side note, that Jews do not believe in proselytizing, as in we don't look to try and gain more members to the faith.
But if someone wanted to become Jewish, you would welcome them.
Correct. We're not looking, just to explain this, we don't look for more people to join the faith. We do look that everybody should keep the mission that God has for them, to keep the 7 Noahide laws. So if a non-Jew would come to me and ask me, how does God want me to conduct himself? I would have, of course, what to tell him, and I would be happy to and overjoyed, and I would go out to explain and help people know what God wants from them to do those 7 laws. But for the Jewish people have their mission to have 613 laws. If a non-Jew wants to join the Jewish part of that mission, he is entitled to. The main process, the main aspect, there is a ritual that's done, but the main idea needed to do that is you can't go halfway. You can't say, okay, this specific Jewish tradition is beautiful. I want to be Jewish because I want to keep a specific Jewish tradition. I love, the Shabbat candles that light every Friday night. So I want to take on that tradition. That doesn't make you Jewish if you want to take on one specific tradition. To take on Judaism, you got to take on the full story.
The whole covenant.
Yeah. The full covenant of 613 commandments. And that's why it becomes a little bit, because it's sometimes a little bit challenging to do all 613. People sometimes find that, a little bit much, and that's why many people, and it's not overly encouraged, conversion to Judaism, but if somebody wants to, and I know many wonderful converts. For a non-Jew, most of the 613 commandments, if they would like to, they're welcome to do them. So if a non-Jew wants to keep many of the commandments, they're totally entitled to do. There are certain commandments that God says this commandment is special for the Jewish people and not for others. So there are some of those, not many. There's about, you could list them on one hand. I think it is Shabbat, Tefillin, and it's got to be one more, which I'm not thinking of.
And can you say what is Tefillin? Shabbat? Tefillin
is, I didn't bring it.
What is it in English?
There's no English word for either of them.
Shabbat
Phylacteries. Tefillin is phylacteries, and Shabbat is the seventh day of rest. Shabbat is to rest and not to work on the seventh day of the week, on Saturday. Tefillin is leather boxes that Jewish men wear every day of the week, except for Shabbat. You may see me this year, I don't know about, because of social distancing.
Are you talking about?
Put on the head and the hand, correct.
Okay. That Deuteronomy, where it's recorded to, yeah. Okay.
If social distancing allows for it, you may bump into me using it for some students. John, you may have seen me last year doing it with some students on campus. And as soon as social distancing allows for it, you definitely will see me on campus assisting the Jewish students with the tefillin. So that's something specifically for Jews. But pretty much everything else, if a non-Jew wants to keep most other Jewish practices, they're welcome to.
So forgive me if I say something incorrect here, okay? But for my understanding, is the phylactery the same as the tefillin, or is the phylactery? Okay.
That is the same thing. Tefillin, just the Hebrew term, phylactery, I don't know where the term comes from, but it's the English translation for it. Those are two examples. There might be another one or two that non-Jews don't do, but I'm not sure. I'll have to find out. It says the Talmud opens up with one of the first lines in the Talmud is, teach your tongue to say, I don't know. Okay, let's move on to what are the 7 laws for all of mankind. This is known as the Noahide laws. You could look it up. You'll find plenty of information on it. Today, there's actually full Noahide groups and Noahide communities out there in different parts of America. So there are a number of websites you could look into.
Okay. What does a Noahide community?
There are communities that keep these Noahide laws, as in they want to be a community of the way that God told Moses on Mount Sinai a non-Jew should behave. And
is just looking at them, they're fairly close to the 10 Commandments.
Correct.
Number 4 is just it's I think a typo. Is it supposed to be?
Yes, it's a typo. It's meant to be don't steal.
Okay.
Just run through them quickly. You are right.
I understand that. That is fine. I understand. And thank you so much for doing this.
I was doing this a little bit quickly, but let's just go through them very quickly. Okay. Number 1, which is of course, the base of it all, is realizing there is one God, a higher power that sees everything, watches over everything that we do. God's always looking and watching, and therefore, if God says something, we should fulfill it. There's nowhere, of course, to hide from him. This is probably the most fundamental and the foundation of all of them, is believing in one God, realizing there is this higher power watching us. Number 2 is don't curse God, as in treat God with respect. Number 3, don't kill. Adultery is considered within this law of don't kill. Number 4, yes, you're correct. That's a typo. I'm sorry for my mistake. I'm not God. I'm far from it.
Fine.
Number 4 is don't steal. Number 5, do not commit adultery. And here was the computer's typo. Don't eat an animal before killing it. This is something which isn't, unlike the previous few, which we still somewhat suffer from today. This one, number 6, is less. We don't suffer from this too much today of people eating an animal alive.
Right, but is this including to make sure the blood is drained out of the animal, or
no? That's specifically for the Jewish people.
Okay,
that is one of the 613 laws that Jews cannot eat blood. Right. But for a non-Jew, there's no issue. A non-Jew just has to ensure that the animal is dead before he eats it. Today, it's not.
Right. So in Noah, the Noahic covenant, did it say strangulation there, or not? I might be mistaken.
No.
Okay. I thought it said don't strangulate an animal and then eat it, which
no, it says don't take a limb from a living animal and eat it.
Which, yeah.
Today it's not really done.
Not too often.
In times of old, you could also kind of understand that today's day and age we have refrigerators.
Yeah.
And therefore it's quite easy to preserve meat. In times of old, it would be more common simply from a economic perspective that if you wanted to eat the animal, and you didn't want to eat it in one day, you can't eat it in one day. Take a limb off today, eat it, and then tomorrow take the next limb off, and that way the rest of the animal stays fresh. That's perhaps why it was more commonly done. I don't know. And the last but not least is setting up a civil court system. This one is actually the broadest of all of the 7, because this includes anything that society takes on to run a civil system.
Okay, great.
So if society takes on, examples brought in Jewish tradition that society took on was, for example, keeping their word, that a word is a word, is an example brought in Jewish tradition that men of old have taken on to keep society going. The civil court system, that would be number 7. Okay. So that's running through the 7 laws of Noah. 613 laws will take us quite a while to run through. So I just gave a few little examples over here. Some you may have heard of, some you may not have heard of. One we mentioned earlier is Shabbat, which is that we work 6 days a week, Sunday through Friday, until Friday before sundown. Friday at sundown, we cease work. Work should not be understood in the literal sense. We have a list of which things we don't do and how we learn out which things we don't do. This is a classic example. We don't drive a car on Shabbat, and therefore it has happened, and I'm sure it will happen in the future. I personally haven't experienced it, but friends have been stuck on the roadside. They were running late somewhere, and the sundown came, and they were stuck wherever they were stuck, and they had to jump out of their cars and walk wherever.
The Jewish day starts at sunset and goes to sunset, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and that comes from Genesis 1, where it says there was evening and there was morning the first day.
Correct.
Okay. Hey, one question I have on this slide is, don't mix breed animal or trees. Does that mean grafting a tree is not accepted?
For a Jewish person, yeah, one of the 613 laws, very good. I just want to go through all of them. So you jump to the other corner.
I haven't heard of before, so I just...
I specifically put in some of them which may not have been known. I put in over here a couple of them that everybody knows and you may very well know, and a couple of them that you may never have heard of. So I just put in Shabbat is that 7th day. It's a beautiful day, a day of rest, a day where we kind of unplug from the world. I celebrate it with the students every Friday night. The students come over to my house and we have a wonderful time.
How do they get home then?
Good question.
Do they stay overnight?
Ideally, they should walk, and I walk to campus. Some of the that's ideally how it should be done.
How far can you walk though on the Sabbath? Isn't there a limit?
There is a limit as well. We actually, when I moved here, I had somebody who's a professional in this area map out to me in this area how far I'm allowed to walk.
Right.
Because I had this question that, the rule is basically you're not allowed to leave the city. So I had the question, is campus from my house out of the city? Because campus is kind of set back from the city.
It is, but it isn't. I mean, yeah, it's kind of hard.
I had this question.
So you try to find a house as close as you could get to the campus.
So pretty much what the expert told me was that to go north of Alika Road, it's totally not built up, and that would be difficult.
Yeah.
From Alika Road south, there's enough built up in the area. It's complicated of how to calculate it, but from Alika Road south, including campus, including pretty much all the communities, all the way down into Bonita Springs, is all going to be one city. Whereas from here north, above Alika Road, would be already a new city to go into Fort Myers.
But it could be a long walk. So
correct. I have done the walk to campus from my house is 5 miles, takes about an hour and a half.
Wow. So so just getting back, I'm just curious about the trees. So like most of the orange trees here are grafted, for example, or many olive trees, they're grafted, I believe.
Very good. Okay, good one. Okay, on the grafting trees, I just thought I would add in a law that you wouldn't have heard of, and a very, just an interesting law is that Jews do not mix graft trees. You are allowed to take a tree that has already been grafted and replant it, but we don't mix breed, not animals and trees. Non-Jews are allowed to.
Okay, just interesting.
So if you had a Jewish farm and you were running a Jewish farm, the rule is you could graft within it. Say if you have different types of olives and they're all within the same olives, you'd be allowed to graft the different
And
types
the
of
same with
olives.
grapes, because a lot of grapes have a certain rootstock, but then, for wine, they graft different grapes onto a sturdy rootstock.
Correct. So that wouldn't be an issue.
Okay.
However, if you're grafting totally different fruit, then that would be an issue. I don't know, a mandarin is, somebody remind me of the science of this, a mandarin is a graft between an orange and something else, and
a mandarin is or a tangerine or a tangelo, or, okay.
They're all grafts of different citrus fruits.
Yeah.
So to make that original graft, a Jew wouldn't be allowed to do. Once they've already been made, there's no issue whatsoever.
Okay. Great. That's just interesting. I didn't know that one.
Some other, some of these kosher is quite well known. Today, you'll notice on any supermarket you'll notice, just looking around the supermarket, you'll notice all these little kosher symbols on many, many products.
Right. Which one is the most universal? Is it the one with the U?
OU.
Yeah.
The OU, the U with the inside the circle, that is the most universal one in America. The most American one. I wouldn't say universal, the most common in America.
And any of these is fine for you, or there aren't different Jewish groups? So, well, they're not quite as
So the answer with that is, very good question. The answer with that is that within Jewish law, there is base law, and then there is stringencies.
Which one's the most stringent of those?
Good question. I don't know.
Which one's the loosest of those?
The loosest of those is the circle U.
Okay.
That's the one which goes most on base law.
Okay.
Which one's the most stringent? The others each have stringencies that they take on.
Okay, cool. I'm learning a lot. Let me tell you, this is fun.
Okay. Jewish holidays. I took a few little pictures of some holidays.
Yeah, we're gonna.
Rosh Hashanah is the shofar, when we blow the horn. That's when the Jewish New Year. Next to that branch is that Sukkot. You will see. I'm not sure when this class is going to be shown, but in October you'll see that.
I think so.
Oops. You see it now?
Yes.
Good. So that branch is connected to Sukkot. You'll see that on campus, whole little hut.
Tabernacles. Yeah.
Hanukkah is the menorah. You'll see a big one on campus in November. The actual holidays in December during break. The next one, I don't know this picture how well they did, but it's meant to be Purim. It's actually a later Jewish holiday, not part of the 113 commandments.
Which one is Purim? Is the one in the left bottom?
The left bottom, that's Purim. That's meant to be some sort of costume. That's celebrating a story which happened much, much later.
Yeah.
The next one following that is the Matzah, is Passover. We celebrate the Exodus. Next to that is celebrating the giving of the Torah. I would have to guess a little bit to work out what
is that the harvest Pentecost, which is the Torah.
That's my guess of what it's meant to be. Meant to be the harvest.
I know.
And the Torah next to it probably is the giving of the Torah, which we celebrated in June.
And that's called Pentecost, or it was Pentecost?
That's called Shavuot.
Shavuot
is what it's called.
Okay.
Okay. On the left side of the page, just what I pulled over here, the grafting, we said, about already, we don't lend money on interest. So amongst Jews, everything is free loan. There's a whole discussion of how a Jewish bank is allowed to work.
Okay. But outside of Judaism, you can lend with interest.
Correct. For a Jewish person, can't lend money on interest amongst the Jewish people. So a Jew could borrow from a non-Jew, or a non-Jew can borrow from a Jew on interest. That wouldn't be, or a non-Jew can borrow from another non-Jew on interest, wouldn't be any issue. And of course, studying the Torah. And this picture is not me, of course, but this is a picture that I've done. Could have been in many an occasion.
Wow.
Of having 50 books out. That was quite a common sight for me when I was in rabbinical school, and really still today when I have a few spare minutes. I could also be like that.
Cool.
Judaism is known as the people of the book. Just to, if the camera, this is a small part of my library.
Right. Mendel, oh wow, that's great. Hey,
Mendel, are we out of time?
We're going to be running out of time. We've got about 10 more minutes, I think. I could cut this into 2 different videos, but I can't go much longer, so.
Okay, so let me run a quick Jewish history and then some different community customs.
That's great. Okay.
And then we'll conclude with that. Okay, quick Jewish history from post Mount Sinai. So again, we had in the year 2448, the Jews left Egypt and they had their Mount Sinai. 40 years later, they entered Israel. They took over Israel. The Jews were in Israel for some 440 years, and then they built the first Beis Hamikdash, which is in Jerusalem, where Temple Mount, where the Dome of the Rock is today.
How do you say
Beis Hamikdash? Beis Hamikdash means in Hebrew the holy house.
Okay.
It's known as the Holy Temple, is what it's known as.
Base, okay, got it.
There's an I missing in the first line.
Yeah, and well, it's in, it's transliterated, so I mean, I understand. I actually took Hebrew, by the way, so.
Yes,
35 years ago, I had Hebrew, but.
So the first Beis Hamikdash was built 400 years after they came to Israel. It was built by King Solomon. That was the center of Jewish tradition, Jewish practice. That was the center of it all. All Jews lived then in Israel. That stood for about 400 years, was destroyed in the year 3338. This is the year where there's big historical controversy on, but not for you'll speak to historians about this. But this is every Jewish tradition says it has the same year.
When Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple?
Correct.
Okay.
This is the main year of controversy, and together with that, the year after, the year that the second temple was built. Those 2 years in English have a year of controversy, but there's basically one Jewish tradition and one non-Jewish historic tradition. So both Jewish historians have 1 year and non-Jewish historians have a different year. And there's many, many explanations given for the discrepancy.
Okay.
That's the 1 year that there's slight discrepancy on. The other years, so the Jews then went into exile in Babylon. Many of the Jews, not all of them, came back 70 years later when the second temple was built in Jerusalem. Less than 50%.
Yeah, many of them stayed. Yeah.
Many of them stayed. And then in the year, I should also mention that before the first temple was destroyed, there was also the exile of the 10 tribes, which many of them have gotten lost. The general historic consensus amongst the Jewish people today is that they have assimilated into the outside world. They either assimilated back into the Jewish people or assimilated into the non-Jews, and there isn't actually a community left today of the 10 tribes. Many of them did rejoin the Jewish people.
So we will, we'll talk about that. That's the kingdom of the northern tribes of Israel, or Samaria, it's been called. And
I just thought I'll just bring a mention of that. I wanted to actually get to a different thing, which is more during the second temple, which is more relevant for the next slide as well, which is differences amongst Jewish communities.
Okay.
Now, the Torah, the way that Judaism works is the Torah is everlasting. Mount Sinai only happens once. There is no second Mount Sinai where God's giving us, the last 500 years I gave you this story. Today I'm changing story. From now on, you're going to start celebrating every Tuesday instead of every Saturday, or,
Right.
There isn't that situation that Judaism doesn't change. However, what there is that the rabbis were told that they should add on things. Judaism is not allowed, and no laws can be added or subtracted. However, rabbis were told to put on additional things to safeguard Judaism, as in recognize that the law of the Torah is to do a certain thing, and we will add to that certain things to ensure the tradition will be kept.
Where was that written?
It's mentioned in Deuteronomy.
To add to it?
To do safeguards.
Okay.
Not to add to it, but to add safeguards onto it.
Okay. Could you, if you find that passage specifically, I'd love to, if you would email it to me.
I'll give you the Hebrew term I know. I don't remember the exact verse where it is.
Okay.
I know the Hebrew terms for it. I can't remember which verse it is.
Okay.
But I will send it to you.
I have a Masoretic text, so.
I will send it to you. The Hebrew term is asur mishmeres lemishmarti, make guards to my guards.
Okay.
That is the.
So what happens after the destruction of the second temple in 69 in the Common Era, right? Or 3829. Because all of a sudden many of the commandments around the sacrificial system are gone.
Very good point. You're on, but you just historically a little bit. It's actually a little bit earlier.
Okay.
Okay. So that's why I wanted to bring up this, and then we'll go drop into different communities.
Okay.
So at the beginning of the Second Temple era, actually 400 years earlier, the rabbis had just experienced the first destruction and the first exile. And they saw what assimilation can lead to. As in the center, where if Jews don't have this central place of the Beis HaMikdash with sacrifices and all, many of the 613 laws, close to 400 of them are only relevant in Israel or only relevant with the Beis HaMikdash. So we've cut our 613 commandments to about 250. So the rabbis realized that that is not a very safe situation. And therefore, they added many safeguards to Jewish law, which this is known as rabbinical law. They added many safeguards, which this is known as rabbinical law. They were originally introduced primarily, and then some were introduced earlier. Some of the ones that we have today are from King David and King Solomon, but the biggest amount of them were introduced at the beginning of the Second Temple by what's known as the Men of the Great Assembly, led by a famous rabbi named Ezra the Scribe.
Okay. Book of Ezra. Okay.
So he introduced many new ideas to Judaism. Simply, most noted is the fact that we pray 3 times a day, and our prayers.
He also, between him and Nehemiah, tried to eliminate the marriages between Jews and foreigners, correct?
So that was part of the assimilation going, correct. That's a story recorded that he did a whole work to fight intermarriage.
Okay. When
he came to Israel, which this was part of the assimilation that he was seeing at that point.
Right.
So he introduced just, simply the idea that we pray 3 times a day is something introduced by him. This, that we say blessings on food before we eat. We say blessings before, anytime we eat something, we say blessings beforehand and a blessing afterwards. The blessing afterwards is biblical. The blessing beforehand is actually instituted by him.
Okay.
Also, many safeguards onto Jewish tradition. I don't know if these were instituted by him or earlier or later, but many other safeguards to ensure Jewish tradition will be kept. A simple example is we don't mix, part of the kosher laws is not to mix meat and milk.
Right.
But that will only be real red meat. Chicken, biblically, is not part of that commandment.
Oh.
However, because of course, the similarity, and everybody could well understand the similarity between meat and chicken, and it's considered generally the same, category of meat.
Okay.
Therefore, the rabbi said that just like you can't mix meat and milk, also don't mix chicken and milk. Okay.
Because the actual commandment in the Pentateuch is don't boil a kid in its mother's milk.
Correct. So that commandment obviously doesn't mean specifically a goat in its own mother's milk. It is any animal, the animals which give milk, goats, cows, and sheep, and not have any of those in any milk.
Okay.
But chicken, for example, wouldn't be included. Chickens you don't milk chickens.
I haven't ever seen chicken milk. Yes.
So therefore, that's another rabbinical thing.
Okay.
Now, this was expanded a lot after the destruction of the Second Temple. Many more of these safeguards were added. They were compiled totally in the Talmud, all the oral tradition, and all the rabbinical safeguards and rabbinical laws were all compiled in, and together with all the commentary and all explanation was all compiled in the Talmud. and this is famously the Talmud and its extensions. It's not just the Talmud, it also is the Medrash, and I saw somewhere a list of about 50 books that we actually have from that same time period. These were all printed or compiled within the 200 years after the temple was destroyed, after the Second Temple. So between the year 69, the final version of the Talmud came out. I think it was the year about 350.
Okay, great.
So within those 200 years is when that was all compiled. Since then, Jewish people have scattered all over the world.
Right. And I'm sorry, we're going to have to make this pretty quick. This
so
part.
Let's give it a quick, just 2-minute point on that. And I'm sorry okay, a quick 2 minutes on this. Jews have scattered all over the world. And that has come to many, many different Jewish traditions today. Now, most of these traditions are simply connected to the fact that Jews were in different countries for so many years. For example, there are different Jewish dialects, different dialects of Hebrew. So that's simply Jews had limited communication for 2,000 years, and accents and dialects and these things developed. Different Jewish customs of how to celebrate have developed over the last 2,000 years. Also, they were developed in different communities, developed different customs, and that's why you'll see certain customs different between different Jewish people. Okay. Just very generally, very generally, the Jewish community is divided into Sephardic and Ashkenazic. Ashkenazic is European Jewry, and Sephardic is Middle Eastern Jewry. And everybody else somehow or rather fits into those two categories, not very well fit in, as in there's a lot more subcategories.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll talk a little more about that in class. So,
of course, there's different Jewish foods. So if you'll hear there's a certain Jewish food, like gefilte fish, that's only a Jewish food for Ashkenazi Jewry. Jewish dress is the same thing. There's going to be different Jewish dress. Now, the other thing, prayer versions, being that the prayers were actually primarily set in stone only more recently. So there are varying praying versions between different Jews. And also, and here comes where it comes a little bit more complicated, is that there are certain laws that were added and finalized, rabbinical laws, biblical laws, everybody does the same. But certain rabbinical laws were only finalized much later. And therefore, a law may apply to Jews from one country and not to the other. The classical example that every Jewish student knows is on Passover, we don't eat leavened bread. Ashkenazi Jews also don't eat rice and a bunch of other grains. Middle Eastern Jews, to this day, never took on that Ashkenazic law, which was instituted by Ashkenazi Jews in Europe about close to 1,000 years ago. And to this day, they'll have this difference. However, the base, the Torah and the biblical law, everybody will be identical.
Okay. And
thank you so much for joining.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We'll go into more of this class, the difference between different groups within Judaism, but the basics have been covered, and you did a great job, Rabbi. And I think a number of students hopefully will take up this as the area to explore more that's outside of their faith tradition and have a dialogue or an interview with you on some of their questions. But boy, this was fascinating to me too. I learned things that I did not know before, and I'm hoping that Mendel, we can have some more dialogues in the future between the two of us. Okay?
Sure, it's a pleasure.
Well, blessings.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
And you all too, students, whenever you're watching this, enjoy this and respond appropriately to the discussions that we're going to have in class.